All the world's beginnings, Jamestown, 1607 to 1630. On a dim December morning in 1606, three stub-nosed merchant ships nosed down the Thames with frost on their rigging and England's future in their holds. Susan Constant, the largest at just over 100 feet, led the column. Godspeed and Discovery tugged after her, decks crowded with men too young or too restless for life in crowded parishes. They were the human cargo of the Virginia Company of London, a join-stock venture spun from merchant greed, Protestant swagger, and the gnawing fear that Spain would corner the New World alone. Exactly 105 passengers and 39 crew answered to the company's muster that morning, their names copied into a clerk's leather ledger now dark with salt stains. JYFmuseums.org. The crossing took 17 weeks, beset by headwinds and a near mutiny off the Azores. When the trio finally sounded the shoals at the broad mouth of what Spaniards called Bahia de Santa Maria, they pressed upriver to avoid marauding privateers. On the 14th of May 1607, the captains dropped anchor beside a wooded island whose oaks bent over brackish water. The English baptized both river and settlement in honor of their young king James I. They carried ashore sealed instructions from the company, opened them, and learned the names of the governing council. A grizzled adventurer named Captain John Smith, whom they had kept in chains for mouthing off during the voyage, read his own appointment with quiet satisfaction and sudden leverage. They could not hang a man the royal seal had just promoted. The first fortnight was noise and sweat and mosquitoes. Axes rang. Trees toppled. The outlines of a triangular bastion crawled outward from a crude blockhouse. Each point of the triangle took a small iron saker gun, trained across the slick brown channel. The builders worked in their jack shirts despite the heat, for the surrounding forest bristled with eyes. Warriors of the Powhatan Confederacy, a network of 30-plus Algonquian-speaking bands, commanded by Wahunsenacawk, whom English scribes soon reduced to Great Powhatan. At dusk, embers pulsed red all along the palisade ditch, while men chewed half-cured salt pork and dreamed of gold seams waiting in the hills. HistoricJamestown.org, a season of first misunderstandings. Powhatan's people approached first in cautious barter. Blue glass beads, copper bells, and the bright edge of an English axe held obvious value. So did baskets of maize when English bellies nodded with hunger. Yet each exchange carried misread symbolism. The English believed they bought food. The Powhatans believed they extended a favor that might bind this new tribe to the chiefdom's hierarchy. When gifts failed to appear in return, warriors slung arrows. The colonists replied with muskets that belched smoke and fire, but often misfired in damp air, breeding derision as much as fear. Smith himself was captured that December while poking upriver for corn. By his own heavily embroidered account, he was paraded before Powhatan, sentenced to ritual death, and then spared by the chief's young daughter Pocahontas, who laid her head across his instruments of execution. Whether the moment was rescue or adoption right, it bought a winter's breathing room. Encyclopedia Virginia, fever, foul water, and the mathematics of death. Jamestown sat on a malarial swamp. Brackish tide pushed salt into the well's every high water. Pig pens and latrine pits leaked into the same sandy layer. By September, more than a dozen settlers were dead. Their names struck through in the clerk's roster. The company's leaders in London wrote peremptory letters blaming idleness, never grasping that the men's strength bled out in fevers between tides. Still, the colony limped through its first year. They buried their president, elected another, and bickered about ration theft, as if the next supply ship were sure to appear. It did, briefly. In 1608, Captain Christopher Newport returned with new men, 2 Polish glassblowers, and a small cargo of provisions. He sailed again, promising more. 9 months later, a hurricane splintered his resupply fleet off Bermuda, marooning survivors and almost all the barrels of meal that should have wintered the James. Inside the palisade, the wells swelled with brine. Outside, Powhatan's messengers withdrew into the forest. Then came the winter Virginians, still whisper as the starving time. The starving time. One winter, 60 corpses, and a secret in the soil. Siege stories vary in their numbers, but the dirt is blunt. Archaeologists under Dr. William Kelso have counted 66 graves dug that winter within a space no larger than a tennis court, many huddled 2 or 3 deep. One rectangle held the skeleton of a teenage girl whose skull bore tentative, then violent, cleaver marks. Grim testimony that desperate colonists had butchered her after death for calories. Historians long dismissed those rumors as Spanish propaganda until the forensics team at the Smithsonian matched the blade scars to 17th century carbide steel. Half the colony died between October 1609 and May 1610. Some chroniclers place the toll at 2/3. Smithsonian magazine The Guardian. When the thaw finally slicked the palisade ditch with mud, the survivors ignited their thatch roofs, boarded Newport's pinnace, and aimed downstream for home. They met salvation at the river's mouth. Governor Thomas West, Lord De La Warr, arriving in state with soldiers, a doctor, and casks of ale. De La Warr's flagship blocked the channel. He ordered the broken company back upriver under the king's banner. Jamestown would not be abandoned. Martial law and the gospel of work. The new governor declared laws divine, moral, and martial, a draconian code that allotted daily tasks down to wheelbarrow loads and nailed iron collars to men who shirked. Whippings, dunkings, and even the threat of execution carved order from chaos. The severity shocked later generations, yet by the brutal arithmetic of 17th century empire it worked. Houses rose on real foundations. Fishing nets stitched from hemp bolstered rations. A church big enough to hold the whole colony took shape at the center of the fort. The English might still perish, but they would do so on schedule. Brown gold, how tobacco rescued the ledger. Meanwhile, a quiet experiment sprouted in a sandy test patch. John Rolfe, a widower who had lost both wife and newborn on the hurricane-ragged voyage, planted seeds of Nicotiana tabacum obtained from Trinidad. The local strain the Powhatans smoked was too harsh for London palates. His Caribbean variety, sweetened by the tidewater's soil, proved addictive alchemy. The first cured leaves sailed to England in 1614. By 1617, some 20,000 pounds cleared customs. The following year, that tonnage doubled, and auditors in the company's counting house finally saw black ink instead of red. Encyclopedia Virginia Rolfe himself cemented the commercial diplomatic miracle by marrying Pocahontas, now baptized Rebecca, in the Palisade Church. For 2 years, Powhatan's warriors sheathed their arrows, wary of spilling kin blood. The couple's 1616 publicity tour in London, exotic princess, wealthy planter, curly-haired son Thomas, briefly turned Jamestown into the most fashionable gamble in the city. Shares in the Virginia Company traded hands at a premium, new recruits queued for berths. Women, burgesses, and a different kind of ship prosperity demanded permanence. So in 1619, Governor Sir George Yeardley authorized the shipping of 90 maids for wives, young women whose passages would be paid by any man who took them handfast and reimbursed the company in tobacco. Domestic stability, officials argued, would tether settlers who might otherwise cash out and bolt for England. That same sticky July, sweltering delegates from every river plantation squeezed into the rough timber church at Jamestown for the first meeting of what came to be called the House of Burgesses. They debated the price of French wine, the quality of leaf packed for export, and the thorny question of fair wages for tenant farmers. No one present could know that this casual gathering would echo through centuries of colonial grievance straight into the Continental Congress. HistoricJamestown.org Encyclopedia Virginia. Yet the year that birthed representative government also birthed enduring contradiction. Late that August, a weather-pocked Dutch privateer limped into Old Point Comfort with a cargo it had seized from a Portuguese slaver, 20 and odd Angolan captives. Yeardley permitted their sale in exchange for victuals. Some scholars believe the Africans became indentured servants, others that they entered lifelong bondage straight away. But the deeper fact is unambiguous. The seed of American slavery was planted in the same soil that nursed elective lawmaking. Fires in the forest, the wars of 1622 and 1644. Powhatan died in 1618. His half-brother Opeshankanaw saw no profit in appeasing a colony now sprawling beyond its palisade. On the 22nd of March 1622, Powhatan warriors walked unarmed into outlying English homesteads, shared breakfast, then rose in coordinated fury, killing 347 settlers, about a quarter of Virginia's population, before midday. Jamestown itself was warned and narrowly held. The English retaliated with scorched earth raids that burned crops and poisoned wells. 2 decades later, Opechancanough, now in his 70s and paralyzed, loosed a final assault. He was captured and shot in prison. The Confederacy never recovered, its political center moving west as colonists fenced the tidewater in plantations measured by thousands of tobacco hills. Encyclopedia Virginia. The Company falls. The Crown rises. News of the 1622 massacre rattled London markets. Investors demanded explanations. Pamphleteers decried mismanagement. King James, eager to consolidate authority, revoked the Virginia Company's charter in 1624, converting Virginia into a royal colony. Paradoxically, the political experiment survived. The Crown found the Burgesses convenient for local taxation, and tobacco revenues kept flowing so long as planters felt some agency. Jamestown's slow eclipse. By the 1640s, Jamestown looked less like a town and more like a way station. One wooden church, rebuilt after fire, a brick statehouse, a handful of taverns, and warehouses stacked with hogsheds waiting for convoy. The settlement flooded twice a month at spring tides, bred clouds of midges, and offered nothing a prosperous planter could not enjoy better upriver. After Bacon's rebellion burned the statehouse in 1676 and another fire followed in 1698, the Assembly voted to move the capital to the high ground of Middle Plantation, soon rechristened Williamsburg, leaving Jamestown to sink into provincial obscurity. Resurrection by trowel. For 2 centuries, visitors believe the original fort had long since sloughed into the James. Enter Bill Kelso in 1994, armed with a hunch that Captain Smith's hand-drawn map still held truth. Within a month, his team uncovered the stain of a post hole exactly where the map suggested. By season's end, they traced the entire triangular palisade. Over the next decades, they lifted more than 4 million artifacts. Venetian glass beads, Spanish olive jars repurposed for ale, a child's pewter spoon, the corroded hinge of a chest that may have held the colony's first written laws. The dig even located the brick foundation of the 1617 church where Rolfe took his vows and where Burgesses argued their first statutes. HistoricJamestown.org. Most haunting were the graves. A field team brushing soil from a coffin lid found captain's hardware. The skeletal remains of early governors, buried in forgotten chapels, told tales of gout and lead poisoning. And then in 2012, the slender bones of the teenage girl historians dubbed Jane, her butchered skull, a mute witness to the winter none could forget. No court record had preserved her name, but knife marks did. Visitors today stand behind glass watching conservators glue her cranial fragments together under halogen lamps, a grim counter-narrative to gilded adventure. Smithsonian Magazine. Step off the ferry to historic Jamestown on a muggy June afternoon, and the air still tastes of marsh salt and river tannins. A wooden replica of Susan Constant rides at anchor nearby. Costumed interpreters clamber over ratlines, explaining how 71 souls slept between her lower deck and ordnance. Across the footpath, iron-capped posts outline the fort's north bastion. Artifacts rise weekly, Spanish trade beads beside Powhatan pottery, beside shards of English Delftware. Tangible proof that 3 worlds collided here, not just 2. Jamestown matters because it is contradiction made visible. It is the birthplace of English America, 13 years older than Plymouth, and also the first English place to buy enslaved Africans. It is where representative government flickered to life and where martial law strapped iron to men's ankles. It is a testament to ecological hubris, settling a malarial swamp, yet also to the stubborn human genius for adaptation. And it is the ground where European ambition met indigenous sovereignty, the repercussions of which still reverberate from land-back movements to federal recognition debates. Echoes forward. Tobacco's boom and bust monoculture foreshadowed the Cotton South. The Burgesses foreshadowed Congress. The Powhatan Wars foreshadowed every treaty line pushed westward. Jane's skull foreshadowed the human cost behind booster slogans. When modern Americans argue over immigration, over corporate power, over who is enfranchised and who is expendable, they are, whether they realize it or not, arguing logics first tested on that narrow spit of tidewater clay. So stand at the riverbank at dusk, when the tourist crowds thin and the tide whispers up the stones, and imagine the creak of cordage as 3 small ships ride at anchor, their sails furled like folded wings. The men on board cannot yet smell the swamp or taste the brackish water. They cannot conceive that winter hunger might drive them to carve flesh from a coffin. In the moment before the first oar dips, the story is still all promise. Gold, adventure, deliverance for England's poor. History, stern and complicated, waits just beyond the tree line.